I'm Rachel Morgan, 34, and for as long as I can remember, I carried the weight no one else wanted. I paid the bills when the lights in their house flickered. I handed over my card when my father's heart needed surgery. I even covered the deposits for Chloe's wedding, while she smiled like it was all hers. I told myself it was love, that maybe one day they would look at me and see more than a name on a receipt. But love was not what I heard when the phone rang that night. My mother's voice was flat and final. She said I was not welcome at my own sister's wedding unless I apologized. In that moment, every sacrifice sharpened into truth. I was never the daughter, never the sister, only the bank they depended on, and for the first time in my life, I decided I would stop paying the price. The call came just as I dropped my bag on the floor of my Cambridge apartment. My heels were half off my shoulders, sore from another day crunching numbers at the firm. When the phone lit up with my mother's name, I almost let it go to voicemail. Something in me already knew what was waiting. I answered, and her voice cut through without a greeting. "Rachel, you are not welcome at your sister's wedding, unless you apologize." I froze the phone slick in my hand. Apologize for what? I finally managed, my voice thin. "For embarrassing this family," she said, her tone clipped, steady as glass. "Chloe deserves a perfect wedding, not drama from you. If you show up without making things right, you will humiliate us all. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." The silence that followed pressed down like a weight on my chest. I wanted to shout that I had bankrolled her so-called perfect wedding, that the only reason Chloe could book a ballroom at the Four Seasons was because I covered the deposits. But my mother didn't pause to let me speak. She ended the call with a curt "goodbye," and the line went dead. The apartment around me seemed to hum louder. The refrigerator clicked, a car horn blared outside, but all I heard was her voice, cold and absolute. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch, staring at the blank wall, as if it might explain how a mother could erase her daughter with a single sentence. I scrolled with shaking hands until I found Anna's number and pressed call. She picked up right away, her voice steady, grounding. "Rach, what happened?" "She said I can't come," I whispered. "Unless I apologize, unless I say sorry for things I didn't do." Anna was quiet, then sighed, the sound of someone who had seen this coming. "You don't owe them anything. You've held that family together for years." The words burst out of me like a dam breaking. I told her about the thousands I had poured into their lives, the nights I wired money so the lights in their house would stay on, while mine flickered the surgery bills for Dad, when no one else lifted a finger, the endless shopping trips Chloe disguised as emergencies. I confessed that I had hoped each time maybe they would finally see me. They never did. Anna's voice softened. "Maybe it's time you stop being their net. Let them fall. Let them fall." The words stung and soothed all at once. I had never let myself imagine it. I stared at the binder on my coffee table, stuffed with receipts and contracts I had saved out of habit, proof of every dollar I had spent. My hand closed around the worn edge of the cover. The paper inside crackled, a reminder of everything they took and everything I carried. I stood and walked to the window. The Charles River stretched below, dark water, reflecting the glow of city lights. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired eyes and clenched jaw. For the first time, I didn't see the dutiful daughter ready to clean up another mess. I saw a woman who could stop. I thought of my mother's voice, certain I would beg to come back. Certain I would swallow pride just to sit quietly in a corner at Chloe's wedding. Instead, a new certainty settled in my chest. I would not apologize. I would not grovel for a place at their table. Anna's last words echoed again. "Make this choice for you." I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, watching the city hum below. My phone buzzed with a new notification, another automated reminder about Chloe's wedding payments, and the irony made me laugh out loud, sharp and bitter. I picked up the binder, its weight heavy in my hands, and held it close. For once, I wasn't thinking about saving them. I was thinking about saving myself. And as the pages rustled under my fingers, memories of each sacrifice came rushing back, each one a story of how far I had gone to keep them afloat. Those memories were waiting, pressing against the edges of my mind, and I knew I couldn't push them away any longer. I opened the binder, and the first slip of paper that slid loose was a utility bill from the fall of 2015. My name sat at the top, my checking account number stamped at the bottom. But the address was my parents' house in Newton, not my own apartment. I remembered that night clearly sitting on the floor of my place with a single lamp burning, while I typed out another payment so their lights would stay on. They had promised it was temporary, just a few months until Dad's hours at the store picked back up. Months turned into years. By the time 2020 rolled around, I had poured more than $18,000 into water, gas, and electric bills for a house I did not live in. I could still hear my mother's voice the first time I hesitated. "Rachel, you make good money. It is just a little help. Your sister deserves to focus on her future, not on bills." I told myself she was right, that I could handle it. I wanted to believe that being dependable would finally make them proud. Instead, I became invisible, a background figure they only noticed when a bill arrived. I flipped deeper into the binder until my hand stopped on a hospital invoice dated June 2019. I had rushed to the cardiac unit after work, still in heels, my laptop bag cutting into my shoulder. Dad lay pale against the sheet's wires, running across his chest. The surgeon met me in the hall, explained the cost of the procedure, the urgency, the fact that without an immediate deposit, they could not move forward. I had not even thought twice. I handed over my credit card, $10,000 on the spot. Later that night, Mom held my hand briefly and whispered, "You saved us." Then just as quickly, she was on the phone with Chloe, reminding her to get some rest before her internship interview. I remember standing there in the sterile hallway, realizing I had taken on the role of savior without ever being asked if I wanted it. The receipts told the story better than memory ever could. There was the florist invoice with my initials in the margin, the catering deposit marked paid from my account, the tuxedo fittings that had been charged to my card. Between 2020 and 2024, the wedding had become a black hole that devoured my savings. Chloe picked venues as if she were royalty, switching from one ballroom to another, each time requiring a new deposit. Dresses, tastings, engagement parties, all signed under my name. She promised she would pay me back once Kyle got his commission bonus, but the promises dissolved the moment the ink dried. I added up the numbers with the back of an envelope one night. Utilities, $18,000. Dad's surgery, $10,000. Wedding and lifestyle, at least $20,000. Nearly $48,000 drained out of my accounts and into theirs. I stared at that total so long the digits blurred. What hurt most was not just the money. It was the way they acted, as if it were nothing. Mom bragged to her friends about Chloe's taste in designers, without mentioning that my paycheck had made it possible. Dad nodded silently whenever the subject of finances came up, never acknowledging what I had carried. And Chloe always smiling, always moving to the next shiny distraction, tossing me a quick thanks before asking for more. I traced my fingers along the binder's spine, feeling the weight of years pressed into paper. This was more than a stack of receipts. It was proof of every sacrifice I had made, proof that I had existed in this family even when they tried to erase me. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and relief, because for the first time I understood that this binder could be more than a record. It could be my weapon. I shut the binder firmly, the snap of the cover echoing in the quiet room. Outside, the city kept moving, headlights streaking across the river, students laughing down the street. Life went on without me needing to rescue anyone. I held the binder against me like armor, and knew the day was coming when I would no longer be the invisible daughter. What I had not realized yet was how quickly that day would arrive, and how far I would be willing to go once the next call came. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds of my apartment, but it felt harsh, almost like it was daring me to finally move. I sat at my kitchen table, the binder of receipts open in front of me, my laptop glowing with a half-filled search bar. My fingers hovered over the keys before I typed it in without hesitation. One-way ticket to Maldives. The screen filled with photos of white sand and turquoise water, an impossible paradise, and yet my hand did not shake as I clicked through dates. I selected the flight 3 days before Chloe's rehearsal dinner. The confirmation email appeared in seconds, my name spelled out as if it already belonged there. My phone buzzed against the table. It was Mark Sullivan, the attorney I had emailed the night before. I answered, and his calm voice filled the line. He had reviewed my notes, the binder, the contracts. I asked the question I'd been afraid to put into words. Could they come after me? Could they sue me for pulling the payments? Mark paused only long enough to let the weight of my fears settle. Then he said clearly that in Massachusetts and under federal law, every dollar I had spent was legally considered a gift. Unless there was a signed loan agreement, they could never force me to return to that role. My shoulders dropped as if someone had cut a rope. For the first time in years, I exhaled fully. After the call, I opened my banking app. My thumb pressed the freeze option on the family credit line, and I watched as the status changed from active to locked. I logged into the utility company's site and canceled the autopay I had been funding since 2015. The screen flashed confirmation, and I stared at it for a long moment, almost in disbelief that something so small could feel so monumental. Next was the phone company. I had been carrying 3 extra lines for years, each one a drain I barely noticed until now. With a few clicks, I removed the family plan from my account. The final step was to stop the scheduled transfers for Chloe's wedding deposits. I typed the word cancel, hit confirm, and closed the laptop. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My heart pounded, but it was not panic. It was power, sharp and steady, filling spaces inside me that had been hollow for years. I stood and paced across the living room, my arms tight across my chest, the echo of my mother's words still lingering. You are not welcome unless you apologize. Instead of apologizing, I had just erased their safety net. I caught my reflection in the darkened window. There was no trace of the daughter who folded under pressure, only a woman with the faintest trace of a smile pulling at her lips. I whispered to the empty room that this was my choice, and I would not undo it. That evening, Anna stopped by with takeout, and I told her what I had done. Her eyes widened as she set down the cartons. Then she let out a low laugh. You actually did it. You finally cut them off. She leaned closer, her voice firm. You know what this means, right? They will come after you. I nodded, feeling the tremor of fear, but refusing to let it control me. Let them. I am done being their wallet. Anna studied me for a moment and then raised her glass of iced tea. To freedom. We clinked cups, and for the first time the word did not sound like a dream, but a possibility. When she left and the apartment fell quiet again, I picked up the binder one more time. The receipts rustled like whispers of the years I had given away. I slid it back onto the shelf, no longer a record of my weakness, but a weapon I might need soon. My flight confirmation sat in my inbox, a beacon pulling me toward a place where none of them could reach me. What I did not yet know was how quickly the fallout would begin, and how far the chaos would spread once the first payments failed to clear. 2 days later, my phone began buzzing before sunrise. At first, I thought it was just another work alert, something I could swipe away, but the screen lit with names I recognized from Chloe's wedding contracts. The first voicemail came from Eleanor Davis, the planner I had met once when Chloe dragged me to a tasting. Her voice was tight and professional. Rachel, the venue, notified us that payment authorization has been revoked. They cannot proceed without confirmation. Please call me. I stared at the message and felt a strange calm. By mid-morning, the flood began. Emails stacked one after another. Subject lines flashing canceled, declined, unable to proceed. The ballroom in Back Bay locked the reservation. The caterer sent back a curt note confirming their trucks would not be dispatched. The florist who had boasted about imported orchids wrote that without funds they could not hold the order. Even the DJ left a casual text saying, "Sorry, no payment, no gig." By noon, my call log filled with Chloe's number, on repeat, then my mother's, then a string of relatives. The red counter on my phone climbed higher, 27 missed calls, then 54, then 69. 132 messages stacked in a single thread, each one more frantic than the last. The words blurred as I scrolled. How could you? Fix this. You are ruining everything. I set the phone down on the nightstand of my hotel room in Malé and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was heavy with salt and sun, the ocean stretching in endless blue. The waves curled and broke softly against the shore, a rhythm so far removed from the chaos exploding back in Boston that it almost felt unreal. I leaned on the railing and let the sound of the surf drown out the muffled vibration of my phone inside. A notification banner slid across the screen before it dimmed. It was from Emily, my cousin. Unlike the others, her words carried no accusation. "Everyone is in shock. Aunt Linda is screaming at the planner. Uncle David looks pale. The whole family is whispering about how the wedding has collapsed from the ground up. I thought you should know." For a moment, my throat tightened. Emily had always been kind in quiet ways, slipping me an extra plate at holidays, asking about my job when no one else cared. Her message was not gloating, just fact. The structure I had held together for a decade was crumbling in full view of the people who once pretended not to see me. Inside the phone lit again, Chloe's name flashing with a new voicemail. I didn't play it. I pictured her pacing in a half-decorated ballroom, her perfect nails clawing at her phone, her voice shrill as she realized no one was coming to save her this time. The image should have brought guilt, but instead a strange peace settled in my chest. The sea breeze lifted strands of my hair across my face, and I closed my eyes. For years I had been drowning in their demands, their emergencies, their endless appetites. Now I was weightless, suspended between the calm horizon in front of me and the storm tearing through the family I had left behind. The binder back in my suitcase rustled faintly when I moved it earlier, a reminder that my proof and my shield were still with me. My mind flickered with what Mark had told me, that no matter how loud they screamed or how many lawyers they threatened, the law would not let them drag me back. As the sun dipped lower, the phone finally stopped buzzing. The silence that followed was louder than the storm had been, a pause heavy with what would come next. I had no doubt they were already plotting their response, and I could almost hear the words forming on my mother's lips. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to start at 7, but by 6:30 the guests were already arriving to a ballroom half-lit and bare. White tablecloths were folded against a wall. Flower buckets stood unopened by the service entrance, and the caterers' trucks never showed. I did not need to be there to see it. My phone filled with messages, photos taken by distant relatives who had flown in from Chicago and Atlanta. They posted on Facebook before the evening was over, tagging each other with captions, asking what happened to the grand wedding Chloe had promised. By the time I scrolled through the first post, the comment section had already turned savage. People whispered about unpaid vendors, about a family with champagne taste and no money to back it up. Jonathan Lee, a local reporter known for digging into society mishaps, had published an article before midnight. The headline read in bold letters, "Socialite Wedding Collapses in Back Bay." My family's last name was printed in the opening sentence, and there was no taking it back. I lay on the bed of my overwater villa, the blue lagoon glimmering outside while the glow of my screen illuminated the storm unraveling across Boston. Then came the voicemail from my mother. Her voice was shrill, cracking between rage and desperation. "Rachel, you have destroyed us. You killed the reputation of this family. You killed my daughter's wedding. Do you understand what you have done?" Each word hissed like acid, but I listened all the way through. There was no trace of love in it, no hesitation, only blame. My chest tightened, but not with guilt. I set the phone down on the nightstand and stared at the thatched ceiling until my pulse steadied. I remembered every moment she had told me I was less every time Chloe was lifted above me. This was not destruction. This was consequence. Another vibration rattled the phone. This time it was a screenshot forwarded from Emily. It was a text between Chloe and Kyle. "If there is no money, then what are we even doing?" The words cut even through the glow of the screen. Chloe had circled his message in red and sent it to my mother with a string of frantic exclamation points. I could picture her panic pacing the empty ballroom in her half-laced gown, clutching her phone, begging Kyle not to back out. But his words were already out there, plain and merciless. Without the facade of luxury, There was nothing holding their engagement together. As the night stretched on, the news spread beyond family circles. A cousin posted a shaky video of the empty tables, and within hours it was reshared by strangers. Comments poured in about how quickly the mighty had fallen, about karma and waste. Chloe's carefully constructed image cracked in public view, and she could not stop it. I stepped outside to the deck, the humid air pressing against my skin, the sound of waves filling the silence between alerts. My phone kept buzzing, but I let it rest on the chair beside me. I closed my eyes and let the ocean swallow the noise, each wave carrying away the shrieks of my mother, the cracks in Chloe's fairy tale, the disbelief of our relatives. Somewhere back in Boston, the rehearsal dinner had ended before it even began, guests filing out with their coats and whispered gossip. And I knew that by morning, the chaos would not stay confined to social media. The family would not sit in silence. They would find another way to strike back, and when they did, the storm would only grow darker. The morning of the wedding dawned bright in Boston, but the pictures flooding my phone showed nothing but disaster. Guests milled around a locked hotel ballroom staff, turning them away with stiff apologies. The florist never returned, the caterer vanished. The band posted on Instagram that they had been released from their contract. What should have been a morning of champagne and photographs was instead a parade of confusion and whispered blame. By mid-morning, Linda had left me a string of voicemails, her tone shifting from outrage to icy threats. One of them cut deeper than the rest. "We will take you to court, Rachel. You will regret this." My stomach clenched, but I did not panic. Instead, I scrolled to Mark Sullivan's number and called. He answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, like a stone dropped into a rushing river. "I have already looked into it, Rachel. They have nothing. Every payment you made counts as a gift in the eyes of the law. Unless you drafted a loan contract, they cannot touch you. Even if they try, it will not stand in court." I sat back in the chair of my villa, staring at the blue horizon as his words sank in. Relief rolled through me so strong it almost felt like dizziness. When I hung up, I found a new message from Emily. She had been at the hotel since dawn, and her text was blunt. "Everyone is talking. Aunt Linda is shouting at staff. Uncle David looks broken. People keep saying maybe this was the day Rachel finally stood up." I read it twice, a slow warmth rising in my chest. For years I had been invisible. Now, even whispered in shame, my name was finally being spoken with recognition. An hour later, a screenshot appeared from another cousin. It was Kyle's message to Chloe. "I will not carry this family's debt. I am not marrying into ruin." The words were merciless. I pictured Chloe clutching her phone, mascara streaking down her face as she realized the man she had planned to flaunt was already halfway out the door. I stepped outside to the balcony, where the sea stretched endlessly, a perfect mirror of calm. For the first time in years, I felt my lips curve into a real smile. It was small, almost hesitant, but it was mine. The chaos back home had no power here. The waves kept moving, the breeze kept shifting, and I was free. The sound of my phone vibrating pulled me back. More messages from family, demands for explanations, pleas, threats. I let them stack unanswered. I turned instead toward the horizon, letting the salt air fill my lungs. I thought of every bill I had paid, every sacrifice I had made, every night I had believed they would finally see me. Now they saw me in the one way they never expected, as the hand that could withdraw and let them collapse. I traced the edge of the binder resting in my suitcase. Its pages were more than records now. They were my shield. I had always imagined revenge would look like shouting, like confrontation in a crowded room. Instead, it looked like silence, like the still surface of water while the storm ripped everything apart behind me. What I did not yet know was that silence would not be enough for them, and the next blow they planned would force me to face them more directly than ever before. A week later, the messages stopped sounding like threats and started sounding like surrender. Emily forwarded me a photo of Chloe sitting on the front steps of my parents' house. Her hair unbrushed, her wedding gown balled up beside her like a discarded costume. The caption beneath told the rest. Kyle had walked away before they even signed the marriage certificate. He left her with unanswered calls and a note that simply read, "I cannot do this." Without the glamour of a grand wedding or the security of family money, he had no reason to stay. The fallout was swift. My mother had been a deacon at her church for years, proud of the perfect image she curated every Sunday morning. Now whispers followed her down the pews. People crossed the hall instead of greeting her, their polite smiles replaced with pity or disdain. I heard from Emily that one woman asked loudly during coffee hour what happened to all those vendors who never got paid. Linda had no answer, only a stiff smile that cracked at the edges. My father, who had stayed silent through most of it, finally picked up the phone. His voice shook when I answered so thin I almost didn't recognize it. "Rachel, I was wrong. You were the one who saved us more times than I can count. You were the one who kept us afloat. I'm sorry I let it happen." The words hung between us, fragile and late, but real. I pressed the phone to my ear, unsure if I should let myself believe them. For years I had waited for acknowledgement. Now, with his voice breaking on the other end, I realized I did not need it to survive. Still, the apology touched something deep, a wound I thought had calcified. That afternoon, an envelope slid under the door of my villa. The resort staff had delivered it with my other mail. I sat on the bed, my heart pounding as I saw the crimson crest stamped on the corner. Harvard Business School. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside the letter confirmed what I had prayed for in silence through endless nights of exhaustion. I had been accepted into the MBA program for the fall of 2025, round 3. The tears came fast, not from pain, but from release. For years I had poured myself into keeping others afloat, while my own dreams sank to the bottom. Now the world was opening a door just for me. I clutched the letter until the paper crumpled, the words blurring as my vision swam. My chest ached with a new kind of weight, the kind that came with possibility rather than obligation. I walked outside onto the deck, the ocean spread wide and endless, the sun dipping low in the horizon. The air smelled of salt and promise. I whispered to myself that I was no longer a caretaker. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was a woman with her own future, one that stretched further than the years I had spent paying someone else's bills. The waves rolled steady, and for the first time, I let myself believe that happiness might be mine, without needing anyone's permission. What I could not know was that the remnants of my family's pride had not yet burned out, and their final desperate act would reach further than I expected. The sun was sinking low over the Indian Ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I sat on the deck of my villa with my journal open across my knees, the paper curling slightly in the humid air. My pen moved slowly, as if each word I wrote carried the weight of every year I had given away. I wrote about being the daughter who paid the bills, the sister who covered, deposits the invisible hand that kept the lights on. I wrote about how it ended, how one phone call from my mother shattered the illusion and pushed me to choose myself for the first time. The waves lapped softly against the stilts, below a steady rhythm that matched the calm inside me. For the first time in decades, I was not calculating due dates or wiring money in secret. I was breathing without debt, without guilt. My mother's voice no longer hovered over me like a shadow. The binder of receipts lay tucked safely in my suitcase, no longer a burden, but a reminder that I had survived. News had trickled in through Emily. The church community that once praised Linda now whispered about her arrogance. Friends crossed the street rather than meet her eyes. She tried to hold her head high, but the crown had already slipped. Chloe sat alone in her old bedroom, stripped of her groom, stripped of her fairy tale. Her wedding gown shoved into a closet like an artifact no one wanted to touch. My father had become quieter still, though his one apology echoed in my ears when I let it. I thought of Kyle's blunt message, the one that ended everything for Chloe. Without money, there was no marriage. His absence was the truest vow he ever gave her. Karma had done its work, not with fire or fury, but with silence and withdrawal. What they valued most had turned to dust in their hands. I held the acceptance letter from Harvard again that evening, smoothing the creases where I had clutched it too tightly. The future stretched wider than the horizon in front of me. No one else's debts could chain me down. No one else's pride could bury me. My life was finally mine. The sky deepened to indigo, the first stars trembling above the water. I closed my journal and set the pen aside. The ocean breeze lifted my hair, and for once it did not feel like a weight, only a reminder that I was light, unbound, free. I whispered into the dusk that I had never truly been invisible. I had only been waiting for the moment to step out of the shadows. That moment had come. I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath me, and let the question form in my mind, as if I were speaking it to the world. If your own mother told you that you were not welcome unless you apologized, would you bow your head and comply, or would you book a one-way ticket and choose freedom?